couldn't get onto my computer. And I'm trying to find a way to
My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statements calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticisms of my work and ideas, but if I sought to answer all the criticisms that crossed my desk, my secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. I want to try to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. Justice too long delayed is justice denied.
Well, peace, friends. I'm Pastor Tom Arthur in Sycamore Creek Church in Lansing, Michigan. I'm so glad you are here with us today as we are into episode 2 of Letter from Birmingham Jail. This is the second year that we have produced a version of Letter from Birmingham Jail. It's a piece, of course, by Martin Luther King Jr., and I, as a white pastor, wanted my predominantly white church to hear his message really kind of annually. And I couldn't have imagined how important it was for us to hear it this past year, for the last year that we've gone into, probably the most significant civil rights year, at least of my lifetime, and probably most of us here in the room. Tonight, I'm joined in the studio with some very special guests for episode 2 of Letter from Birmingham Jail. Of course, Rico Bruce Wade is with us, local award-winning actor, the director this year of Letter from Birmingham Jail. Thank you for being here.
It's great to be here again. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of this project.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I've just been amazed. My job has been to put the talented people in the room, and you've been one of those. So thank you for saying yes. Tonight, we also have Jeff Croff. He's the artistic director at
Ixion Ensemble Theater.
There we go. Thank you for pronouncing that. But pertinent to tonight, he is the actor who played Paul Hardin, the Methodist Bishop. I see you didn't wear your dog collar tonight.
I didn't, or the sweater,
Thank you for joining us tonight, Bishop.
It's a pleasure.
Tonight as well, we have Dr. David Hornak with us. He is the superintendent of Holt Public Schools, where my kids attend at Wilcox Elementary. Shout out to the Wildcats.
Thank you, Pastor Tom. I'm excited to be here with you, and I appreciate the invitation for this important conversation. As I was preparing today, I remained troubled by the lack of progress over the last 60 years. Now, I just want to put a little note out there that I did receive my second COVID shot today, as well as, I ran a half marathon today. So if I sound like I'm off track, it could be one or the two, or, as you were saying, both.
There we go. All right. And joining us through technology tonight is Kathie Dunbar. She is joining us through Zoom. And Kathie is the Lansing City Council member at large. Thank you so much for joining us, Kathie.
And
joining us through technology tonight is Kathie Dunbar. She is joining us through Zoom. And Kathie, either you or me has the video running in the background with the sound, and actually, as I look at it, it is me. So I have now done that multiple times. Thank you so much for joining us, Kathie, tonight. All right. Well, hey.
Thank you.
I've invited David and Kathie to join us because I think together with me, Rico, we've talked about this several times. We're great representatives of the audience that Martin Luther King Jr. had in mind when he wrote his letter from Birmingham Jail. So he was sitting in the jail. Really white leaders who, well, I don't know whether we're all moderates or not, but we, some of us, larger institutions than others, lead across a wide variety of convictions. And in that sense, there's a way that I think MLK is speaking directly to us. And so I wanted to spend time with them, with Kathie tonight, and with David, reflecting on the message of MLK for leaders in situations like we find ourselves. I know MLK pushes me. He's pushed me this last year. I got off the sidelines in a way that I don't think I would have had we not done this production last year of Letter from Birmingham Jail. So I'm really curious whether this letter pushes Kathie and David in similar ways. So this year, because of COVID, we decided to film the production because we couldn't get a bunch of people in the room. Last year, we had like 300 or 400 people come through, and then release it in 3 acts over 4 episodes. And the first 3 episodes are about a third of the letter. And in the 4th episode, we'll stitch it all together. Along the way, we have different special guests joining us. And so we want to invite you right now to take some time to share this out, like our page. This is a really simple way to get out this letter. We think that what we've produced tonight and this sort of cinematic production, we've sort of turned Letter from Birmingham Jail into a movie this year. And I've heard from teachers in the region that this is a potential resource for them in teaching their classes. So get the word out. And we'd love for you to comment along the way in Facebook or YouTube. Give us your thoughts and questions. And while this is all free, we are part of a larger movement in Lansing called CORE, Congregations Organizing for Racial Reconciliation, that is building a movement of anti-racist churches in the Lansing region. And if you'd like to donate to that, you can go to sycamorecreekchurch.org/give, and you'll pick the fund that says Other, and then in the memo line, put CORE in the memo line. And while you're at it, check out our CORE Facebook page. That's facebook.com/group/CORE Lansing, and you can stay in the know. Rico, let's get to Act 2 here. Tell us what we need to know to be prepared for what we're going to watch here.
Today is a rather solemn anniversary. It's the anniversary of the death of Breonna Taylor. King reminds us that the need for social justice and the need to change systemic problems is urgent. As the final quote that we heard before we came on, justice too long delayed is justice denied.
Sometimes life denied.
Yes. I think with that in mind, we can move forward.
All right. Well, without further ado, here's Act 2 of Letter from Birmingham Jail.
It's Thursday. Easter Sunday's coming up. You know, I used to walk 5 miles to church every Sunday. Church wasn't but 2 blocks away, but I'd take the long way around. So you ain't got no excuse. I expect to see everybody, especially you, Sister Tammy. You might want to plan on going twice. But right now, I got a hot new one for you.
Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
We're gonna jump, we're gonna shout, we're gonna turn it out. It's a party in the park, and I expect to see everybody there. Sister Tammy, bring your toothbrush. If your neighbor's not listening, tell them you heard it here.
Get out of that kitchen, baby, wash your face and hands. Get out of that kitchen, baby, wash your face and hands. Wear your big smile, stop, because I'm such a hungry mess. Where you wear your hair, baby, look so mellow and fine. Where you wear your hair, you look so mellow and fine. I can't believe Shake, rattle, and roll. Shake, rattle, and roll. Shake, rattle, and roll. Shake, rattle, and roll. You won't do right, I don't know. Shake, rattle, and roll. Praise the Lord. Hey, boy. Praise the Lord. Well, all right. Yeah, get it, boy.
He writes as if we've done nothing.
We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward gaining political independence. But we still creep at the horse and buggy pace toward gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it's easier for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, when you see the vast majority of your brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you are harried by day and haunted by night, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next. And you are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance is run over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. So I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience.
When rights are consistently denied, a cause should be pressed in the courts and in negotiations among local leaders and not in the streets. We appeal to both our white and Negro citizenry to observe the principles of law and order.
You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern. One may ask, how can you avoid breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. So I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. But one has not only a legal, but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with moral law. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority and the segregated a false sense of inferiority. Is not segregation an existential expression of man's tragic separation, his awful estrangement, his terrible sinfulness? Thus, it is that I can urge men to obey the 1954 decision of the Supreme Court, for it is morally right, and I can urge them to disobey segregation ordinances, for they are morally wrong. Let us consider a more concrete example of just and unjust laws. An unjust law is a code that a numerical or power majority group compels a minority group to obey, but does not make binding on itself. This is the difference made legal. By the same token, See, a just law is a code that a majority compels a minority to follow and that it is willing to follow itself. This is sameness made legal. Let me give another explanation. A law is unjust if it is inflicted on a minority that as a result of being denied the right to vote had no part in enacting or devising the law. See, throughout Alabama, all sorts of devious methods are used to prevent Negroes from becoming registered voters. And there are some counties in which, even though Negroes constitute a majority of the population, not a single Negro is registered. Can any law enacted under such circumstances be considered democratically structured? Sometimes a law is just on its face and unjust in its application. For instance, I have been arrested on a charge of parading without a permit. Now, there is nothing wrong in having an ordinance which requires a permit for a parade. But such an ordinance becomes unjust when it is used to maintain segregation and to deny citizens the First Amendment privilege of peaceful assembly and protest. I hope that you are able to see the distinction I am trying to point out. In no sense do I advocate evading defying the law as with the rabid segregationist. One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law.
This is anarchy and subversion.
There is nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was evident sublimely in the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar on the ground that a higher moral law was at stake. It was practiced superbly by the early Christians who were willing to face hungry lions and the excruciating pain of chopping blocks rather than submit to certain unjust laws of the Roman Empire. To a degree, academic freedom is a reality today because Socrates practiced civil disobedience. In our own nation, the Boston Tea Party represented a massive act of civil disobedience. We should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal. And everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that had I lived in Germany at the time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. If today I lived in a communist country where certain principles dear to the Christian faith are suppressed, I would openly advocate disobeying the country's anti-religious laws.
Just as I formerly pointed out that hatred and violence have no sanction in our religious and political traditions, I also point out that such actions as incite to hatred and violence, however technically peaceful those actions may be, have not contributed to the resolution of our local problems. We do not believe that these days of new hope are days when extreme measures are justified in Birmingham.
I must make two honest confessions to you. First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in this stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of a direct action. Who paternalistically believes that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that the law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice, and that when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that the present tension in the South is a necessary phase of transition from an obnoxious negative peace in which the Negro passively accepted his unjust plight, to a substantive and positive peace in which all men will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. Actually, we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive.
We all have that opportunity for new, constructive, and realistic approach to racial problems, just as we can choose to incite hatred and violence.
In your statement, you assert that our actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they precipitate violence. But is this a logical assertion? I mean, isn't this like condemning a robbed man because the possession of money precipitated the evil act of robbery? Isn't this like condemning Jesus because his unique God consciousness and never ceasing devotion to God's will precipitated the evil act of crucifixion? We must come to see that, as the federal courts have consistently affirmed, it is wrong to urge an individual to cease his efforts to gain his basic constitutional rights because the quest may precipitate violence. Society must protect the robbed and punish the robber.
It takes time to change a man's heart. These demonstrations will just harden their hearts.
I had also hoped that the white moderate would reject the myth concerning time in relation to the struggle for freedom. I have just received a letter from a white brother in Texas. He writes, "All Christians know that the colored people will receive equal rights eventually, but it is possible that you are in too great a religious hurry. It has taken Christianity almost 2,000 years to accomplish what it has. The teachings of Christ take time to come to earth. Such an attitude stems from a tragic misconception of time, from the strangely irrational notion that there is something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills. Actually, time itself is neutral. It can be either used destructively or constructively. More and more, I feel that people of ill will have used time much more effectively than have the people of goodwill. We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men willing to be co-workers with God, and without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively in the knowledge that time is always ripe to do right. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy and transform our pending national elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity. You speak to our activity in Birmingham as extreme, but I stand in the middle of two opposing forces in the Negro community. Now, one is a force of complacency made up of Negroes who, as a result of long years of oppression, are so completely drained of self-respect and a sense of somebodyness that they have adjusted to segregation. And a few of the middle-class Negroes who, because of a degree of academic and economic security, and because in some ways they profit by segregation, have unconsciously become insensitive to the problems of the masses. The other force is one of bitterness and hatred, and it comes perilously close to advocating violence. Nourished by the Negro's frustration over the continued existence of racial discrimination, this movement is made up of people who have lost faith in America, who have absolutely repudiated Christianity, and who have concluded that the white man is the incorrigible devil. I have tried to stand between these two forces, for there is the more excellent way of love and nonviolent protest. I am grateful to God that through the influence of the Negro Church, the way of the nonviolence became an integral part of our struggle.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. Rico and Jeff, this production this year especially, it's so intimate. It's so right up in MLK's face. It's right up in Bishop Hardin's face. It's the letter on an intimate level. And for me as a white leader, kind of very, I mean, you want to pull back. It's uncomfortable. Talk about the intimacy of what we just saw.
It was very important to make the letter come alive, to make that urgency very apparent, and putting the viewer in the same space as these characters was part of that process, and finding actors who would take the risk to authentically portray these characters is very important. Thank you, Jeff.
You're very kind. Yeah.
No, it's just the truth.
Nobody ever wants to play the guy on the opposite side of history. Jeff, what was it like to be in that role and see it so intimate right up in the screen?
I think, as you said, discomfort comes to mind very quickly, is realizing that talking for moderation when it is other people's lives being impacted, much as you talked about, it's just so jarring to realize how complacent I am, over the last year, as you've said, and jarred into action, and sitting there hearing King's words and the legitimate accusations was pretty humbling.
There's a moment there where Randy Flick, who's doing the video work, puts you both in the same room. And
Yes.
now it's become a conversation with two people in a room, one in pain and the other one saying, wait before you get that pain resolved.
Yes. Yeah, a conversation that you cannot escape. That was part of the idea. Paul Hardin was not Bull Connor. He was fairly progressive for his time and place, but absolutely there was the need for more action, for greater action.
Yeah. We learned last week from the bishops that Paul Hardin was at one point the pastor of First Methodist Church in
Yes.
Birmingham, and that when one of his laity came to him and asked him, can we have the White Citizens Council meet in our church, he said no.
Yes.
And he said, if that's what this church wants, then I'm not the right pastor for it. So he is progressive in his moment and a moderate, which brings us really well, I think, to the next thing that I want to talk about, which, David, we're so grateful that you're here with us today. And you and me and Kathie are all white leaders over broad institutions with a lot of different convictions that we try to lead through. And I was going to read a portion of the letter, but then I realized, wait, we have this whole theatrical production. So I pulled a brief little minute and a half clip that I want to play and then have you react to it as a leader. How does it hit you? So let's watch that, and then we'll get your reaction.
Just as I formerly pointed out that hatred and violence have no sanction in our religious and political traditions, I also point out that such actions as incite to hatred and violence, however technically peaceful those actions may be, have not contributed to the resolution of our local problems. We do not believe that these days of new hope are days when extreme measures are justified in Birmingham.
I must make two honest confessions to you. First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in this stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of a direct action, who paternalistically believes that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection.
David, give us what's happening in your gut right now, in your heart, as you hear that, and particularly as you lead this large, predominantly white institution, whole public schools.
Well, we've yet to realize Martin Luther King's dream. That's all there is to it. To me, this is about time and laws, and in many cases, white people continue to hide behind phrases like, I need more time to think about this, I need more time to study this idea, we need to go through the proper channels. It's time to get uncomfortable.
Yeah, the proper channels, wait, be patient. That's all this kind of debate about gradualism. And talk to us about how you think about it. How does King push you, or how does King, in that midst of that tension around gradualism, how do you lead, or how do you respond to that?
Well, I would define gradualism as something that is slow and gradual, that changes, to benefit society, I guess. And we don't have time to be slow and gradual anymore. It's time to take action.
Yeah. So where does that, as you lead at whole public schools, how do you lead? How do you do that with this broad spectrum? Where does that play out for you?
Well, I think really it comes down to we need to tap the power and influence of the people in our organization. As you know, we have a strong Holt Equity and Access team that is out there, the HEAT team. And I've never seen it more energized or organized. And I've been in the organization for 27 years. We've been working towards, improving our organization for the last 27 years, for the last 100 years, for the last 50 years, you name it. But this is the year that we're starting to make some real progress.
Where are some places where you've seen that progress?
Well, we are broken down into approximately 5 different subcommittees, and we are analyzing, hiring, and coming up with some new practices to not only recruit, develop, and retain, but really grow our footprint across the nation. We need to draw people to Mid-Michigan, and we need to, focus on that. We have been analyzing the curriculum. Let's face it, the curriculum over my lifetime has been very white.
Yeah. What does that mean, that the curriculum is white, and what would it look like differently?
Well, I'm not sure we've been teaching real history. At times, I think that we have seen it through one lens, and what we saw on screen tonight is really an example of. I reconnected with this letter over the last 2 weeks once you invited me, and I was so honored to be invited to participate. And the long and the short of it is, there were some things in there that somewhat surprised me. I'm 50 years old. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. As a leader myself, I find, unfortunately, and I don't know, Paul, if this was your experience as you were playing Bishop Hardin, I'm like, I've said those things 50 years later. I've said those things, and King is calling me on the carpet, I think, for doing it.
Absolutely. I like I said, I think it's just really humbling to be reminded that we can't delay. We can't wait. We can't ask others to endure because our comfort is gradual and slow and respectable.
Yeah. We, David, you were talking about like recruiting and hiring and so on. Something my wife is deeply involved in HEAT in the public schools in Holt, the Holt Equity and Access team. And something she taught me recently is this research about two in the pool that I didn't know about. We just recently hired a new person, a new worship producer. And we not only went out and recruited a diverse group of applicants, but we ended up with 2 applicants of color in the pool. And the research shows apparently that if you have 2 applicants of color in the pool, it's much more likely that one of them will make it. But if you have 1 applicant of color in the pool, it's very unlikely that they'll make it through the application process and get hired. How's that playing out? I mean, I see you nodding your head like you're familiar with that research.
I am, and that's going to be one of our strategies this spring and into our hiring season and moving forward. That's going to be something we will be focusing on.
Yeah. Hey, Kathie has been very patiently kind of hanging out in the background here, so we want to bring her on the screen. Again, Kathie, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
So you are somewhere, not here in Lansing, but we're grateful through technology that you're back with us. Give us just a gut check as you watch and reconnect with Letter from Birmingham Jail. How does it hit you in your gut as a city council member?
Well, it hits me in the gut first as a person of privilege. I think that the important takeaway that it's more than the haters working against you that are keeping you back. It's the apathetic people who verbally say they support you and then sit back in their comfort zone and do nothing to advocate for what is needed for folks to succeed. And I think that is something that we all need to be reminded of, particularly those of us who are white and have privilege, is that we really do hold a lot of the answers for solving these problems ourselves. And we can't expect Black and brown people to take on the system in the same way that we have the privilege to do for them and with them. And so I think that was a big part of it. And I really like the part about just laws can be enforced unjustly, because I think we're all witnessing that across the country right now. And we're actually dealing with it at the city level too. And we've done work on sanctuary cities to stop the targeting of ethnic and Mexican, primarily Hispanic, Latino folks in town, and even something as basic as parking. We repealed an overnight street parking ban requirement. It used to be illegal to park in the city from 2 to 5 in the morning, for those of you listening who remember that. And it really ended up impacting a lot of folks who live in houses, rent rooms in houses, multiple people living in the same house because that's the way that they can afford it, but they couldn't put their cars all in the driveway. They were getting a disproportionate number of the tickets. When the parking pass formula was implemented, it cost $125,000. And I'm sorry, $125. I think I'm working on a city scale budget now in my head. $125 to get one of these, and everyone in the house, would have had to get one. And I think they only allowed one per house. And we ultimately said, whatever the goal of this is, it's not working, and we just repealed it.
Yeah.
Because it was the fair thing to do.
So you bring up the question of sort of the part of this letter where King is talking about unjust laws. I wanted to spend some time with you as a lawmaker, reflecting on that. And again, I've got a little about a minute-ish clip from the letter where he's talking about disobeying unjust laws. We're going to watch that, and then we come back and let's talk about what it's like as a lawmaker to hear King talk about breaking unjust laws. So here we go.
When rights are consistently denied, a cause should be pressed in the courts and in negotiations among local leaders and not in the streets. We appeal to both our white and Negro citizenry to observe the principles of law and order.
You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern. One may ask, how can you avoid breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. But one has not only a legal, but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all.
MLK is getting to be a preacher and a theologian at this point, quoting St. Augustine.
Yes.
And this is one of my favorite parts of this letter, as thinking of, he's writing this stuff from a jail without a reference library, without
Yes.
Google, and he's pulling up he's showing off his academic, intellectual skills in this
Yes. moment. And it very specifically to his audience. These are men who know these things.
Yeah. Who probably all quoted St. Augustine in sermons
Yes.
without even taking second notice that St. Augustine is an African bishop. So, Kathie, as you hear that as a lawmaker, you hear MLK's reasoning about not obeying unjust laws and obeying just laws. What do you think of that? How do you make of that? And how does that inform the process of lawmaking, particularly lawmaking when you think of it as law? I feel like laws are regularly like compromises, or that's the process of, again, back to that sort of gradualism, slowly but surely.
My take on this, several things. I don't write laws for the purpose of order. And I think that that's like that's an important point to make, because when you want order more than justice, it totally changes how you craft a law. And ultimately, I don't like laws for the sake of being punitive. Like, there has to be a better social good at the end of it. There has to be a reason other than you can't do this. Like, I was always the kid that asked why. I would have been your nightmare in Sunday school because I was full of the why for everything. And
at Sycamore Creek, we would have loved that. We've got kids in Sunday school that ask why every Sunday. Well, not right now because there's no Sunday school, but.
Well, then I will visit you because I ask a lot of whys. So, as an example, the Jim Crow laws and the laws that were spoke about by Dr. Martin Luther King, the two sets of laws and being discriminatory toward Black folks. I apologize. I'm on a lag with the computer, and I'm trying not to look at that and see the lag. The issue is also an unjust application of the same laws, and so there's also laws that are written that don't specifically target. They don't claim to target Black and brown people, but that's the effect that they have.
I think that's a really important thing that a lot of white people don't often think about. And as I've gotten deeper into this, is the idea of intent versus impact. And white people often want to say, well, that wasn't our intent. For example, when you mentioned the parking law, which I'm not necessarily familiar with that whole thing, but the white lawmakers often, like, very defensive, will say, well, we didn't intend it to impact more people of color, more proportionate than other people. But the impact is really what you're looking at. The intent is not really that important, particularly in lawmaking. It's much more like, who is this impacting and how?
Right. Well, and soon I think we all have a responsibility as lawmakers to find out that if we have a law that is unjustly impacting certain members of the community, we have a responsibility to change that. I was a proponent of and worked very much for sanctuary cities several years ago because I did not believe that we should be stopping people for the fact that they looked like they might be Mexican and the possibility that they might be illegal, which I don't believe in the term illegal. I'm using the term that was used by those supporting those type of laws. So I was not in favor of racially profiling for traffic stops. I was not in favor of our own police force or our courts participating with ICE to help find people, to actively go find people who haven't done anything wrong and try to, get them out of this country. So I have my own issues with those kind of things, but also, we're in the process right now. I think this might be interesting for some of your folks to know. Councilmember Jackson is proposing repealing several laws that are on our books, and any community can go through their book of ordinances and find rules that are no longer valid. Like, you can't park your horse in front of the Capitol building. Do we need to have it there? Probably not. But these are laws that really do unjustly target folks, and for what purpose? Like, you can't climb a tree in a park. Yes, we don't want people to damage the trees, but who gets harmed if you're caught climbing a tree in a park? Like, when did we start legislating for the protection of property more than the protection of people? And I think that that's also something that came up during this last summer's riots. And I say riots in quotation marks, those protests, when everybody was claiming them to be riots and saying, why do folks have to break windows, and why do you have to destroy things, and what are we trying to do here? We were more concerned about a broken window than we were about this incredible oppression and violence of police against our neighbors. And why is that? Why have we put a priority on the window and not the entirety of this population that has been suffering? So
this reminds me. So I grew up in evangelicalism, and I went to Wheaton College, which is kind of a flagship evangelical undergraduate school. And there's a story that's told. I don't think it's apocryphal, but I think it is actually true. Tony Campolo, who is kind of this rabble-rousing speaker, one time was in chapel. Remember, this is a private, conservative, Christian, liberal arts, evangelical school. He's standing up in front of everybody, and he says, I don't know, 60, 70% of the children in the world are starving, and you all are sitting here in this chapel, and you don't give a shit. And the thing that's even worse is that you are more concerned that I said shit in chapel than what I was saying it about. And he's kind of unmasking in that moment our duplicity as, whether it's evangelicals, but it's humans. The MLK speaking to us white moderates, like, you're more concerned, as you said, Kathie, about a broken window than about this huge issue of justice. David, you're kind of leaning into your microphone like you want to add something there.
I do. I really do. I think it's time to serve as co-conspirators rather than the dam that blocks the flow of social progress. And to that end, that means we need to work with our black and brown friends and counterparts and take action. We need to create good trouble. That's one of the things we say around Holt Public.
Yeah, I think my wife has told me about, there's a Good Trouble Coalition, if I'm remembering correctly.
That's a countywide coalition, and I'm tickled to say that Holt Public is a part of that. You know, last week we held a countywide author visit that was amazing. We've had over 9,000 views. 3,000 people were watching at the same time.
Nikki Grimes and Kwame Alexander.
Yeah, and here's a good soundbite. One of our students somewhere in mid-Michigan said, "It's the first time I've ever seen someone like me in an assembly on stage."
Wow.
My.
Yeah. Now that's both encouraging, but it's also like, it's like a punch in the gut. Like, why is it 2021 and it's the first time that somebody's seen somebody that looks like them?
And that takes me back to the letter. You know, 58, 59 years later, I'm not sure we've made a lot of progress. And the message is clear. It's going to take each of us to make a difference for all of us.
Yeah. You know, so this is why Rico and Jeff and next week, Nora is going to be with us, who played MLK. This is why this was so important for me as a pastor, that my church hear this. I'm really aiming for this to be an annual thing. But it really has got to become more, Kathie, as you reflect with us on, it's got to be more than just us as white people listening to MLK and sort of, I want to say slashing ourselves. That's not the word I'm looking for. Flagellating ourselves. That's the word I'm looking for, flagellating. But we have to begin to then advocate for the things that our black and brown brothers and sisters, things that actually impact them.
I think that it's extremely important, too, to say that we can never speak on behalf of. We can never assume to know. The only way in order to truly advance this cause is to work alongside and be willing to take direction from our black brothers and sisters. And it's a really important collaboration that is missing in a lot of lawmaking, because if we had talked with a lot of folks beforehand, we would have recognized, we would have been told that there would be impacts. So we might be blind to the impacts when we are creating with intent, but if we actually had a conversation, we might find out long before we made the mistake of enacting something that it would have harmful impacts. And we are in the process right now. I was making a note when you guys were talking earlier about the laws versus the outcomes, and I was thinking back on that principle that the young man got in trouble for wearing a hat to school. Did you hear the story about he was wearing a hat to school? There was a rule about no hats at school. They sent him down to the office, and instead of punishing the kid for wearing the hat in school, the principal talks to him and finds out he got a bad haircut. And the principal is a black man, runs home, gets his clippers, comes back to school, fixes the haircut for this young man so that he can go back to school and not be breaking the rule, the code. And I just think that that's an amazing way to look at what is the purpose of the law, and are we applying it carte blanche just to keep order, or do we always have to look past what that order is and get at justice for the people affected?
It's really interesting, that idea of legislating for order, legislating for justice. And David, as Kathie brings up this story of a principal, it just makes me think about kind of, again, the administration in the Holt Public Schools is predominantly white, and there may not be either the trust for that student to really say what the issue is, or the administrator to necessarily know how to resolve it, to skip over the order question and look at more the human question of justice and care and concern.
Yeah, we're out of balance. There's no doubt about it. We are approximately 95% of the adults are white, and I would say 62 to 63% of the kids are white. And so that doesn't make sense to us right now. And so we are going to be working to balance the equation. We need, we know better. We need to do better. That's really where we're at right now. And we are confronting and getting uncomfortable, and that it's going to, like I said, it's going to take each of us to make a difference for all of us.
Yeah. Well, any last words as we wrap this episode up, Rico? Or
there is a oral history that was Paul Hardin was a part of. Gives you insight into his thinking. He says something very interesting as part of the oral history. He was, for his time and place, progressive. He invited African Americans into his church, albeit in the balcony, not on the first floor. But when asked about how the rest of his congregation would feel about that, one of the things he said was, if your people knew that you believed it was the right thing to do, they would follow you. Ironic that he needed to be prodded into doing the right thing.
Yeah, which is why we need to hear this letter
absolutely
every year, especially those of us who are white and in leadership. So, friends, we're so grateful that you have joined us today for episode 2 of Letter from Birmingham Jail. I'm really excited about next week. Next week will be episode 3, and we will have my personal friend and colleague, the Reverend Dr. Sean Holland, the pastor of Epicenter of Worship, and he's also the director of transformational leadership at One Love Global. And this is at the citywide Black Lives Matter rally at the City Hall, which I've never attended a rally at City Hall until I become friends with Sean and listening to Martin Luther King and getting out of my comfort zone, following Kathie, as you say, my black colleagues and black friends, and letting them lead me. So I'm super excited to have Pastor Sean with us next week. And then in episode 4, we have a very special guest, Mrs. Gloria Davis, who is a Lansing City resident, and she marched as a child in Birmingham.
Yes.
Rico, I think we're probably just going to sit in the studio here and listen to her tell stories.
I think so.
I imagine that's what that's going to be like.
I hope.
Last year, she did attend the live production, and she stood up and shared just a little bit at the very end, and the room got quiet. It felt like we were sitting at one of the feet of one of the leaders of not just our local community, but really our nation and our world. So very excited to have her with us next week, or in the 4th episode in 2 weeks. We would love for you to make sure that you go out and join the Congregations Organizing for Racial Reconciliation Facebook page, and that's where you will keep in touch with what we're doing with this, and you'll be in the know for all future events. Until then, friends, be curious, be creative, be compassionate, and peace out.